The Tower of London is one of the most visited historic sites in all of London. To many, it resembles the peak of Englishness, and survives as a 900-year-old reminder of Norman rule over Britain. Not only that, but it also serves as a keystone for cultural pride, a bastion of the British Empire and the power that it held. But how well do you truly know this castle? In today's video, we'll be exploring the Great Castle of London, discovering its origin story, and revealing why it may not actually be a particularly stereotypical example of an English medieval castle. So join me as together we explore the history of the Tower of London. The date is 1066. The Norman army marches north following their victory at the Battle of Hastings. William the Conqueror is crowned king on Christmas Day of the same year at Westminster Abbey. The future of Saxon England is forfeit. The reality of Norman Britain has begun. To establish their power over the defeated Saxons, the Normans built hundreds of castles all across the country. These began as relatively small and simple motte and bailey constructions. A motte and bailey typically features a large circular earthen mound with a timber tower named a keep or donjon on top, with a large courtyard in the front where most of the important buildings were situated. These were usually a chapel, stables, blacksmiths, and guest lodgings. This selection of buildings were then protected by a palisade wall complete with outpost towers and a gatehouse. Often these castles were surrounded by a dry ditch dug into the ground, and sometimes these ditches were filled with water, which formed as an additional line of defence called a moat. A motte and bailey castle was built on the northern side of the River Thames, hugging the eastern Roman walls of the town of London. It is important to remember that during this time, London was not the capital of England. The capital of Saxon England was Winchester in Hampshire, and this continued to be the royal capital of Norman England as well. By the time of the 11th century, London was already a hodgepodge of architectural styles. There were many timber houses with thatched roofs, each likely having its own garden which was used as allotments and to keep livestock. Many of these buildings would also feature wattle and daub walls, which were made of a fence-like structure, with a clay mixture plastered over it to keep the walls well insulated. You also had some stone buildings, mostly churches and monastic complexes such as Westminster. But you would also see many Roman buildings, left over from the previous Roman period 600 years prior, likely now patched up through multiple centuries of neglect and lack of construction knowledge. One of the most prominent features that continue to be in use from the Roman period were the town walls of Londinium. From what we understand, these large stone walls and gatehouses saw centuries of neglect through the Saxon period. The reasoning for the neglect is unclear, as they served to be a vital line of defence in a world that bore witness to hundreds of years of infighting between warring Saxon factions, as well as apocalyptic raids from the Nordic regions abroad. But, time and time again, archaeology confirms that there is a significant lack in Saxon architectural repairs to the Roman walls of Londinium after the Roman period in England ended in around 450 AD. The Normans made good use of the Roman town walls upon their arrival in the 11th century, and immediately began work on bolstering up and repairing these ancient fortifications, with a modern motte and bailey castle serving as the administration centre for the military stationed here. William brought over some of his best stonemasons from France, with them bringing shiploads of stone from Caen, as this proved to be a high-quality type of stone to construct the artistic facings for large-scale buildings. The main building material was made of a much more local source of ragstone from Kent. The construction of London Castle began in the early 1070s, replacing the temporary motte and bailey castle which stood on this site before it. Back in the 11th century, the stone keep would have dominated the local skyline, and would have served as a constant reminder of Norman rule over the Saxon people. Indeed, it is understood that the Normans even got the Saxon citizens to carry out most of the labour involved in building the castle and digging out the surrounding earthworks. London Castle was, however, not just a castle. It was also the royal palace of William the Conqueror himself. Indeed, he built several royal palaces across his new kingdom, with another being Norwich Castle in Norfolk, around 100 miles northeast of London. What you see today is a 19th century reconstruction of a 12th century Norman palace which stands on this site. The outer facade was rebuilt by architect John Salvin and is made out of Bath stone, a similar type to the stone from Caen that was used in the construction of the original castle of Norwich, as well as the neighbouring Norman cathedral. Here you can see a similar artistic style of Romanesque arches, blind arcading and tracery, designed to impress while also remaining true to a reliably defensible fortress. The keep at the Castle of London also shows the architectural prowess of the Norman masons, while also serving as a formidable bastion of military strength. The Keep of London Castle is also unique, as most Norman castles around England were upgraded to stone in the early to mid-12th century, often as a response to the rising tensions and turmoil of the Anarchy, which was effectively a civil war and a grab for the throne of England between 1138 and 1153. But it seems that London Castle was given prioritised treatment, with the majority of the stone keep being completed by the end of the 11th century. As Norman England continues to prosper throughout the 12th and 13th centuries, the castle continued to adapt and expand. In the early 13th century, King Henry III added a curtain wall around the circumference of the castle, providing an extra line of defence complete with several towers and gatehouses, likely replacing an earlier timber palisade. It was King Henry III who also opted to paint the castle keep white, making it known locally as the White Tower, a name that has stuck for over 700 years. Later on in the late 13th century, King Edward I further bolstered up the defences of these additional fortifications, strengthening the castle more as the Kingdom of England continued to have ever more tumultuous wars with its neighbour across the Channel, France. By this time, London Castle had arguably become the largest and most well-defended in all of England, while also having great sums of money spent on the palatial buildings within the castle, such as the Great Hall, premium lodgings for high-profile guests, and an ornate chapel. Indeed, the circular building that you see protruding from the eastern wall is the apse of St. John's Chapel, the private holy sanctuary for the royals to use. During the reign of King Edward I, the Royal Mint, where coins were stamped and distributed, was moved into the castle premises following an outbreak of forgeries which led to a clampdown on these illegal activities. The Royal Mint continued to be housed inside the castle right up until 1810. The various kings and queens of England also used the castle as a protective place to lock away their valuables in times of volatility, a tradition that continues to this day, with a dedicated building being constructed to house the crown jewels, known as the Waterloo Block, which continues to be guarded by soldiers today. The grand entrance to the keep was on the second floor, with an external wooden staircase leading to the door. Originally there was a forebuilding in front of the grand entrance, like a stone tower which would have acted as an additional line of defence, and the timber stairs would have been removed in times of combat to cut off access to the entrance of the keep. While the Tower of London had been involved in several sieges during its history, the only reported time when the castle fell was during the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. Both King Richard II and Simon Sudbury, the Archbishop of Canterbury, were inside the White Tower as Wat Tyler's peasant army marched into London, having taken up arms against the king in response to harsh taxes imposed on the English people. The king rode out with a retinue of guards to meet the rebel leader and negotiate terms. While these talks were going ahead, a contingent of Tyler's men broke off with an intention to lay siege to the castle. Upon their arrival, to their surprise, they had found the castle gates left wide open. The peasant army then charged into the castle complex and began stealing riches left inside, including what had been left inside the jewel house, the private room where the royals' valuables were kept. The Archbishop of Canterbury sought refuge inside St. John's Chapel in the hopes that the rebels would respect the holy sanctuary, but he was dragged out and beheaded. Throughout the late 14th and early 15th centuries, the White Tower was also used as a prison for high-profile captives. James I of Scotland was imprisoned here in 1406, and many high-profile French lords and nobles were kept here following the Harfleur campaign in 1415, while the English king, Henry V, awaited their ransoms to be paid. During the War of the Roses in the mid to late 15th century, the castle flipped sides constantly as the Crown of England switched between the Yorks and the Lancastrians. One of the most harrowing stories to come from the Tower of London was in 1483, where the 12-year-old Prince Edward V and his younger brother Richard were imprisoned inside the castle keep by Richard III, who was said to have murdered them, as them being alive threatened his claim to the throne. During demolition work of the fore building to the grand entrance of the keep, carried out in 1674, bones were found in the ground underneath the 12th century building, and they were thought to have belonged to these two murdered princes. However, following further excavations in the 21st century, a Roman graveyard was discovered, which provides a much more likely explanation to the source of these bones. By the time of the early 16th century, the Tower of London proceeded to be used less and less by the royalty, likely due to the rise in popularity of new brick manors like what remains here at Kenilworth, which saw incredible revamping over the Tudor period. The White Tower was beginning to feel too small in comparison, and no longer fit for the big egos of the royalty in Tudor England. As such, the castle began to take on a new role, an armoury. When writing about the castle, 16th century chronicler Raphael Holinshed advised that the Great Tower began to be used more as an armouries and house of munition, and thereunto a place for the safekeeping of offenders, than a palace royal for a king or queen to sojourn in. So the castle at London was turned into a military hub, and in 1532, over £3,500 was spent on renovating the castle into a 16th century fortress, which is around £2.5 million in today's money. Much of this modernisation came in the form of strengthening the walls against enemy cannon fire, as well as punching out the arrow slits in the towers to make them capable of housing cannons of their own. On top of this, many battlements were removed along the walls, so that the cannons could easily be repositioned and aimed freely without the crenellations getting in the way. By this time, the palatial buildings still remained in the courtyard of the castle keep. However, they were considered to be in severe state of disrepair, and they were likely reused as soldiers' lodgings for the garrison who lived and worked here. By the mid-16th century, most of the finery and artistic style associated with a palace of royal inhabitants had been removed, and the White Tower now took on a new reputation as a dark, cold, grim prison. It was known as one of the many foreboding places to end up if you found yourself on the wrong side of the law. The reputation of the castle's relative grimness has likely been over-exaggerated over time, as this change took place during the same century as the Protestant Reform, when poverty, basic living and relative squalor had become the new trend being pushed by the Church of England. During this time we also see a greater gap starting to appear between the different social classes of England, a trend which helped trigger the Gunpowder Plot in 1605, in which Guy Fawkes was considered the main person behind this plot, and was subsequently tortured here at the Tower of London on November the 6th, 1605. So, from the 16th century onwards, the Castle of London was now mainly a prison and an armoury for the garrison of London soldiers. But written evidence suggests that the Royal Armouries had a branch here in the White Tower since the 1300s, where John Fleet was notably appointed as keeper of one of the parts of the King's wardrobe in the Tower of London. This back then meant the King's arsenal of armour, weapons, and collection of artillery. It is understood that there had always been an armoury either within the walls of the castle or at least very close by, likely ever since the castle was first built in the 11th century. It is also worth noting that on the south side of the river to the east of the city was Greenwich Armouries, a grand medieval armoury that provided most of England's gentry with armour. It is in the 1400s when we learn about the Office of Ordnance and the Office of Armoury, which replaced the Privy Wardrobe from the previous century. This was essentially a scaled-up programme of procuring arms and armour for a wide range of combat uses, such as polearms, swords, munition-grade armour to arm the garrison, as well as the latest examples of gunpowder weapons such as guns and cannon. The Office of Armoury concentrated on arms and armour, and the Office of Ordnance focused on procuring guns, cannon and warbows, along with a massive supply of arrows. During the 15th century, we see a great technological leap in black powder capabilities, and many kingdoms across Europe began adopting gunpowder weapons and artillery, from the Hussites of the Holy Roman Empire to the English mercenaries of the Beauforts and the White Company, to name a few. The Tower of London is also where we happen to find one of the most earliest examples of cannon technology found here in England, likely dating back to the 14th century. This is one of two of the oldest examples of cannons in England, and they were both found at Castle Rising in Norfolk. King Henry VIII stored many of his most prized harnesses at the armoury throughout the 16th century, including a fully gilded suit of armour. It would also appear that England engaged in the art of deception when organising military plans around this time, as when a German lawyer named Paul Hentzner visited the armoury in 1598, he saw a number of wooden dummy cannons stored at the armoury, which had previously been used to fool the French at the Battle of Boulogne half a century earlier in 1544. Interestingly, we have records to suggest that the keepers of London Castle had introduced a type of tourism by the end of the 1500s, where people, likely those belonging to a higher social status, could pay to view the armour stored within the White Tower. Moving on to the 17th century, and we see a revamp of the armoury with a larger focus on tourism. A new display was named the Line of the Kings, likely in preparation for King Charles II's visit to the castle after spending many years in exile due to the English Civil War. It was during this revamp that these gloriously carved wooden horses were made and displayed alongside the armour, with mannequins adorned in the armour being placed on the horses. At the same time, another display named the Spanish Armoury was also built, showcasing many weird and wonderful polearms from Spain, as well as a number of torture devices. Further installations were placed here in around the end of the 17th century. By then, the interior of the storerooms within the castle looked a lot different to how they do today. Within these displays, some of the strangest examples of weapons were shown off, including this bizarre 17th century axe which also functions as a pistol, as well as a selection of round metal shields which also serve as guns. It is understood that these were either experimental and uncommon weapons used in normal combat, or they may have been reserved for dueling purposes only. Many people will look upon the Tower of London and think it is a quintessentially English medieval castle, but the reality is that this is indeed far from the truth. One of the main issues with the castle is that it has far too many buildings from different periods within its walls, ranging from as early as the 11th century all the way up to the 20th and the 21st century. These varying styles of architecture make it near impossible to get a sense of the true feeling for the original medieval layout. Of course, as we have discussed, the Tower of London has had a long and ever-changing history, and its sole purpose for the City of London has, in turn, changed as well. So we aren't looking at a medieval castle which had its heyday in the 1300s, then met its abrupt end during the English Civil War in the 1600s, as is the story for so many castles around Britain. But this does mean that one of the biggest tourist attractions in London, the medieval castle, isn't actually all that medieval, and doesn't give a true representation of what an authentic castle from the Middle Ages truly is. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of the Tower of London, and I still consider it to be a beautiful building, but if you are looking to explore true medieval castles in England, then there are much better examples to see. Norham Castle on the northern border between Northumberland and Scotland is a stunning example of a medieval castle which illustrates the brute strength that a castle's fortifications can provide. The stone walls of the keep are up to 3 meters thick in some areas, as they were designed to withstand cannon fire in the 15th and 16th centuries. The layout remains pretty much the same as the original 13th century plan when the castle was revamped and expanded in stone, with only minor 16th century additions. You can even still clearly see the original Norman Motte and Bailey layout, with the earth banks of the Bailey still standing tall, and the large motte on top of which the castle keep sits continues to be a threatening feature. The courtyard of the bailey would have originally been filled with timber buildings such as stables, blacksmiths, a chapel and lodgings, some of which would have also been made of stone, but these are now gone and survive only as subterranean foundations. Raglan Castle in Monmouthshire, southern Wales, perfectly illustrates what a high-class manor reserved for the richest of the gentry would look like. Complete with the remains of large kitchens, ornate galleries and giant chambers, Raglan Castle shows off the splendour of upper-class living right up until the 17th century, when its life was abruptly cut short during the English Civil War, where Raglan was besieged and subjected to brutal prolonged artillery fire. Not only does Raglan show what a high-class domestic dwelling was like for the super-rich of the 15th and 16th centuries, but it also shows the formidable defences that make Raglan one of the best examples of a medieval castle in all of Britain. Two giant octagonal drum towers protect a central gatehouse, which originally had a drawbridge, multiple heavy doors and several portcullises. Not only that, but the Yellow Tower, the Castle Keep or donjon, is one of the largest in all of Britain, with its own secondary drawbridge leading to multiple levels of personal chambers. One of the most typical English medieval castle layouts, which was built for pure defence and combat, was Kidwelly in Carmarthenshire, Western Wales. This was a brutal fortress originally built by the Normans, but continued to be favoured by English kings throughout the 12th and 13th centuries in order to keep a firm rule over the Welsh. Dominating gatehouses like this were extremely popular during the 1200s, and similar designs are found all over Britain, but this is one of the best examples of 13th century gatehouses that survives. Kidwelly also features a similar floor plan to that of the Tower of London, also adopting the concentric walls complete with tall defensive towers at each corner, which protect the royal dwelling in the middle. So, in summary, I encourage you to visit the Tower of London and explore its multiple wonders, but all the while keep in mind that what you're looking at is a mashup of many centuries of construction and architectural styles and changes. And, other than the gloriously preserved 11th century Norman keep, only a fraction of the castle is indeed still medieval. Most of what you see here is thanks to extensive 19th century renovation when the castle was remodelled as a tourist attraction. Many of the buildings, such as palatial dwellings, were demolished between the 18th and 19th centuries, and the tower and walls were largely rebuilt in the Gothic Revival architecture style, which was very popular at the time. So enjoy your next visit to the Tower of London, revel in its rich history and stories to tell, but keep in mind that it has been purposefully adapted to be a tourist attraction, and there are some incredible examples of authentic medieval castles elsewhere in the British countryside.